interrupt this broadcast of the Chicago Opera Hour with this bulletin from the WPOD Newswire. Dateline, Chicago. Dwarf detective Billibob Baddins has been grappling with the unknown location of the Singing Sword, but standing toe-to-toe with homicidal curators, conniving socialites, and even Alphonse Capone himself, was peanuts at the ballpark compared to one night of intimate investigations with his client, social princess Julia Lessinger. While in the midst of the afterglow of a very long, very enticing evening, Billy discovers a breakthrough in his case through mixed chicken soup and ham and cheese special. And now you know the story so far. We return you to our regularly scheduled programming here on WPOD, Chicago.
Chapter 14. Not the same old song and dance. It's always tough to get a cab on Sundays, but pay a cabbie enough moolah, and they will take a priest to the gates of hell and get them back in time for morning mass. When my ride finally arrived 2 blocks away, the second ship from Miller and Jackson Incorporated was parked across the street, so I had to take my back door and a few shortcuts to my pickup point. I made a quick stop at my office before rolling back up to the corner of 21st and Clarendon, where I had been a friend of Lou's and talked at length with Daphne of the book balancing and grundle-malking talents. For another 20, I had my cabbie leave the motor running. If my suspicions were true, I would need this driver's talents on call. That hourglass of borrowed time I pictured the night before was pouring a lot faster now. I pounded on the speakeasy door, my breath still labored from the sprint across the street and down the alleyway. The hatch slid back, and there was my favorite doorman, peering out and then down to see me.
"You got balls,"
he slurred through his still healing jaw. "Nice to know there are some things in this world we can agree on. Now we can either make this easy, or I can break your other jaw so you got a matching set. Open the friggin' door." In case the dink had a good grip on his heater this time, I used the awkward silence to enlighten him. "Look, pal, if you call your boss, he will tell you that filling me with lead would be a colossally bad career move on your part. If you want to enjoy a permanent early retirement, be my guest." As he peered through the peephole at me, thinking about calling me on my dare, I could see the hourglass bottom chamber continue to fill. "I ain't got time to dick around. Either pop me or let me in." The peephole lid shut. The door latch slid back, and there he was, staring at me, the red in his face growing like the fire of an oncoming missile launched from a distant catapult. Of course, I had to fan the flames. "I hate to ask you for a favor, Mac, but is Daphne around?"
"You gotta be kidding me."
I took that abrupt answer as his trollish way of saying, "No, Mr. Baddins, I'm not going to help you." So dismissing the door troll, I took the detour to the stage where the band and the showgirls put on productions that stretched well into the wee small hours of the evening. There were fresh scuff marks crisscrossing older scuff marks, the only remnants of a grand spectacle of jazz and flappers, all set on a stage where I barely had room to change my mind.
"You got 10 minutes, short stuff,"
came the doorman, summoning up his courage now that I was a good distance away. There was no point in haggling with this dink like some common peddler in an open bazaar. 10 minutes was really all I could spare anyway, so I had to make this time count. I climbed up the small riser and walked around the stage for a moment, following the scuff marks as best as I could. At certain points in between where feet had been, there were gouges in the stage. I lowered myself to one knee, probing the tiny pinpricks in the wood with my fingertips. Whatever props were causing this kind of damage on a nightly basis were gradually drilling holes and cutting grooves into the stage. The damage was everywhere, but carefully sweeping the riser with my hand, I could tell they were happening within close proximity of one another.
"Looking for an audition, little fella?"
asked a voice behind me. She wasn't as busty and curvaceous as Daphne, but even in her modest street clothes, she boasted a fine athletic frame. Her dress hemline was also high enough to give me a nice look at her defined calves. Although the bags under her eyes were so deep that groceries could be carried in them, there was still an impish glimmer in her dark gaze and an edge in her attitude. I also felt my smile get a bit brighter, The girl was a redhead. Nice. Well, I don't think I would look quite right in the outfits you girls wear, I said, giving her a playful wink. Been a long night, I gather.
If only you would have slipped into my shoes, pal. Last night was murder.
She huffed as she pulled a box of cigarettes from the inside pocket of her coat. I struck a flame for her, to which she nodded as she took her first drag.
Thanks,
She said, blowing the smoke over my head.
So, you a talent scout or an undercover fed?
If I answer with the first, you're going to be a lot nicer with me, aren't you? She chuckled as I stuck out my hand and introduced myself. Billy Baddins, Private Eye.
Glenda.
Hey, Casanova!
The door troll howled across the club.
5 minutes!
Glenda lifted a thin eyebrow as she looked over to him, and then turned back to me.
Let me guess. You're the guy who did that to Bruiser?
Bruiser? I asked. I shot a glance of my own at the doorman, for which I got a scowl and a tapping of his wristwatch in return. Well, I said with a shrug, I guess the nickname suits him now. I took a seat on the riser, looking up at the flapper with my charming batting smile. I'm on a case that keeps bringing me back to this club. Just so you don't worry yourself over whom you're swapping words with, I'm not working for the feds. All I'm doing is asking a few questions. Not the kind of questions that get people arrested. Glenda's mouth twisted into a grimace.
How about getting people canned?
That all depends on the questions I ask, I replied with a gruff laugh.
If you're investigating something that happened here, try investigating where the hell Daphne was last night.
Bingo. Oh, Daphne was AWOL last night?
Yeah. Me and the rest of the girls were covering for her last night. 3rd time this month, too. Little bitch better watch herself. She may be in with the management, balancing the books and all, but we lowly entertainers aren't so attached to the Danzig bookkeeper.
She took a quick drag before continuing her rant.
She didn't bother calling her anything. So here we are trying to make up for this gaping hole in our number.
I was about to fire off another question, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement at the door. Bruiser's wrist came up to his face again, his eyes fixed on his wristwatch. That dumb mook was actually counting down the last minute of the 10 granted to me out of the goodness of his heart. Listen, Glenda, I said, still watching Bruiser mouthing the seconds. You wouldn't happen to know another way out of here, would you?
Sure. I was just about to head out that way myself. But this will mean you'll be buying me breakfast from the bakery.
The bakery?
Yeah.
She smiled, taking a final drag of her cigarette. As Glenda crushed the butt out with her soul, she called out to Bruiser.
I'm taking him out the front door, okay?
Bruiser grunted, which I recognized as a troll's yes. He didn't seem to mind the fact I was leaving through the secret door. Instead of being relieved about my leaving, he appeared distracted. He kept turning his head back to the main door while trying to make certain I was well on my way out of there.
The secret door to this place opens up to a bakery.
Glenda spoke over her shoulder, leading me past dressing rooms and storerooms all lined with brick. No sound getting through these walls.
Poor guy running our front really wasn't happy about getting mixed up with us, you know? He resented getting bullied into this racket by the mob. He was all upset and rude to us until he started getting our business. It started with the hostesses wanting to offer up some nice desserts and pastries that go well with our cocktails. Then we had folks coming in and out, noticing this guy's work in both directions. Now he's just turning a blind eye, hoping the feds don't come barging through his store to arrest his upscale customers.
So Bruiser's okay with me leaving by this route?
He's definitely okay with it this morning. We're having some friends from Canada coming in for a brief stay.
No wonder Bruiser was so accommodating, nerve-wracked, and hostile all in the same lumbering breath that he took with me. He couldn't afford my miniature innards decorating the alleyway on the same day that a truckload of Canada's best was scheduled to arrive. As badly as his damaged pride screamed for retribution, the shipment took priority. Guess I picked the right day to pay Bruiser's post a visit. But this was just the luck of the apprentice again, still with me as it was in my own flop last night. I couldn't help but wonder when that luck would run out, and when it did, how bad of a mark it was going to leave on me. Glenda led me to a thick wall, an apparent dead end, and pointed to a brick just above her head. The cement around it was loosened, deliberately chiseled out so the brick would act as a latch.
Just give this a tap.
I raised an eyebrow at her command. You want to try that again, sister? Despite the futility of her request, she motioned again to the brick above her head. Then, as she looked down at me again, I saw the light go on in her eyes. Miss Sleepyhead finally figured it out.
Oh, yeah.
She laughed nervously, a slight blush coming to her cheeks.
Sorry.
She reached up, and a latch from somewhere inside that wall sounded with a dull thud, and the entire wall now served as a doorway to an establishment rich in the smells of hot bread, fresh pastries, and strong coffee. Guess the poor guy running the place had resigned himself to milking this unbidden opportunity for all it was worth. Once we were both in the storeroom, Glenda slowly pushed the hatch shut.
We have to be quiet, just in case he's got early risers, and we have to make sure we hear the catch.
I nodded. Yeah, the old swinging wall trick. Damn, that brought back some fun memories of trekking through abandoned keeps in my youth, trying to find those secret passages, praying that we didn't come across any tourists trapped in these trick hatches, laughing when we would hear about groups of these dinks suiting up in their best armor to go rummaging through castle ruins and dungeons for buried treasure, sacred relics, or charmed weapons. Stupid tourists. Didn't any of them ever stop to think that maybe these sites were abandoned for a reason? With a dull, the shelf unit now blended in with the rest of the wall again. We then tiptoed through the small storeroom and peered out into the bakery, where only a short, portly man in a modest gray sweater and slacks, protected from his craft by a stained apron, quietly took count of the various rolls and loaves on display. Glenda cleared her throat in the storeroom, twice, and then we entered into the store from behind his counter. The baker just looked at us quietly, sizing me up while slowly stroking his thick black mustache. As I was a dwarf, there was not much to size up, but I'm sure he was asking himself what other sideshow attraction was going to walk out of his storeroom this morning. He shook his head and muttered something under his breath as he resumed taking inventory.
Good morning, sunshine.
Glenda beamed, completely oblivious to the look in this baker's eyes.
How's about 2 coffees and a couple of croissants to go?
I hoped Glenda was better at dancing than she was at reading people. While my money was as good as anyone else's, I could see in the old man's body language that we were the last people he wanted to serve. Before he became involved with Capone's speakeasy, he probably knew all of his customers by first name. And no doubt, they were more than customers, but loyal friends who were willing to cut breaks for one another when needed. Now his real bread and butter were nameless, faceless, privileged speakeasy customers and organization members, who wouldn't come to his aid if it ever hit the fan, be it the feds, cops, or Capone himself. If he ratted out the mob, his next business would involve undertakers and coffin makers. If he continued to play against the G, he faced every day having everything he built taken away. They, both Capone and the feds, threatened to shut down his American dream, and now he was trapped.
Thanks, gorgeous.
Glenda smiled at the storekeeper. This bimbo was starting to lose points with me real quick. She didn't even bother to learn this guy's name.
See you later.
The sun was about to hit high noon, a blessing in itself because there was a slight March chill lingering in the air. Maybe those golden rays would warm up the windy city, just a hint. So Glenda, tell me, I said, taking a sip of the old man's coffee. Strong. Does Bruiser always work the door?
Mondays and Tuesdays are his nights off.
And yours as well?
I'm an honest working girl.
She scoffed.
I'm here along with the musicians every night we can get, although right now we're all taking a couple of nights off and then starting final rehearsals for the new show.
So maybe you wouldn't mind a little guy like me getting an up-front seat one night? From the looks of that dance floor, you girls really put on some number.
Oh yeah, this last one's been a big hit with our regulars, but it was hell on stage.
She smiled, a bit of self-pride giving life to her tired expression.
Once the new stage is put in, we'll start our new review. Just send word backstage that you're in the house, and I'll have a place for you up front and close. Too bad you missed the last show, 'cause I'm going to miss that one. We literally tore up the stage with those dance numbers.
Really? What was the old show?
A salute to Prohibition. For the finale, we all dressed up as Lady Justice, with swords in one hand and scales in the other. The balances were done up to look like 2 whiskey barrels.
Sounds like a riot. I nodded in satisfaction. Thanks again, Glenda. You've been a big help. Enjoy breakfast. She gave me a nod and then started down the sidewalk for home, her hips working like a pendulum with her dancer's derriere serving as a fine counterweight. I took another bite of the croissant and looked into the bakery window. The old man was staring at me, but this time I didn't bother to go for the subtle glance away. I could see in his eyes exactly what I saw in the mirror this morning before I left my hovel. Strangely enough, we shared something in common. How ironic that the two of us were on opposite sides of this town and sharing parallel lives. I wish I knew enough Italian to tell him, "Brother, I know exactly how you feel. You and I are slaying the same dragon." If my hunch was right, I was about to enter the dragon's den. Tonight. The cabbie was thrumming nervously against the side of his car door when I came around the corner. With a flash of my Lincoln, the cabbie gave a nod and drove up to the front of the bakery.
I've been sitting here with the motor running.
Driver number 2347-5 grumbled over his shoulder.
And you know, gas ain't cheap.
He was looking for an out, regardless of how much I was paying for his cab and his time. As I had said before, Sunday was a tougher day to get a hold of a cab. It was not impossible or out of the ordinary, though, for a cab to be seen alongside the road with the motor running. He was probably a little nervous already when, out of all the establishments opening its door on an early Sunday morning, I chose to duck into an alleyway. Then I reappear outside of a bakery opposite of the same alleyway. You didn't have to be as clever as a Wright brother to know what I was up to. I handed the cabbie my Lincoln. "Give me a little more of your valuable time, Mac, and Lincoln will probably have some company. I hear Alex Hamilton is looking for a pal right now." This cabbie already had 2 Lincolns in his pocket, and I was getting ready to throw in a 10. He would be sitting pretty after this fare, maybe even able to call it a day before the afternoon was done, provided the Speakeasy's crew didn't catch us.
"Where to?"
he said, putting the cab in gear. "Around the block." The cabbie turned around to look at me.
Say that again?
"Around the block, and then we sit tight. You just wait on my word, and we move." The cabbie nodded, still trying to noodle through what I was asking him to do. In a few minutes, we were back around the alleyway by 21st and Clarendon, but this time parked at the top of the block. We sat there with engine running, watching the front end of the white bakery truck sticking out of the Speakeasy alleyway. I could see an orc dressed all in white sitting in the driver's seat, sucking on a product of Philip Morris, occasionally checking his watch as if he had to be somewhere soon. I'm sure if anyone were to ask, he was picking up a delivery for a Sunday night service, or maybe a wedding celebration somewhere in the outskirts of town. If we were in a small town somewhere, this much activity on a Sunday would warrant lots of questions from the local law enforcement. That was one of the beauties of this shire. Even on the humans' day of rest, something was always going on in Chicago.
How long we sitting here, shorty?
Until Abe, Alex, and I say so. The cabbie turned around to eye me suspiciously.
Look, Mac, where I dropped you off is under protection. Everyone knows that. I ain't gonna cross Big Al, so either we go someplace other than here, or you get the hell out of my cab.
Damn, I was hoping to avoid this. Guess I was going to have to change the rules on this poor mook. Okay, let me make this worth your while. I pulled out a handkerchief from my coat pocket and opened it up to reveal a beautifully engraved gold coin wrapped in it. The cabbie was fighting to keep his deadpan, but I could see his pupils dilating in anticipation, his eyes squinting at its unexpected brilliance. Would this change your mind? It's worth a couple of Franklins. I need to keep an eye on that bakery truck, and if you help me with this, it's yours.
Let me see it,
he said gruffly. He took the coin in his hand, palming it to feel its weight. He flipped it over, trying with little success to read the various glyphs stamped into its smooth, polished surface.
It's heavy.
Yeah. I nodded, my attention returning to the orc behind the wheel of the bakery truck. Unloading was taking longer than I expected. I wondered if there were any pals from Scotland or Ireland paying a visit too. Can't let the Canadians have all the fun. The guy turned around again briefly, just checking the progress of his pals and the out-of-town guests. He was getting nervous. Any minute now, he was going to be underway, whether the shipment was off completely or not. They were already pushing their luck because they were making this drop in broad daylight, and on a Sunday. So far, no cops or feds in sight. Finally, I watched the goon reach under the steering wheel and start up his truck. It was time to go for a ride. Okay, cabbie. Time to go.
You bet, Mac.
He replied. The bakery truck pulled out of the alleyway just as my driver got his cab in gear. We were about a half block away, playing second shadow to this truck that worked its way through the streets of Chicago.
How am I doing?
My cabbie glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to catch my reaction.
I'm not crowding him, am I?
You're doing okay. Keep this distance, and you should be fine. I glanced for a moment at the cabbie and gave a heavy sigh. I'm not one for changing the rules like this, but I couldn't afford to lose this lead. It didn't make me feel any better playing the magic card, or coin in this case, on this poor sap. The coin, a one-use-only charm engraved with each race's native tongue, was issued to all of us who assaulted the Black Orc's keep on Death Mountain. The humans had a name for a mineral that had suckered in a lot of 49ers into thinking they struck the mother lode. Fool's Gold. I called this trinket the Fool's Gold coin because it really wasn't gold, and it made people easy marks. My driver was now susceptible to my commands for a period of time, and once the spell wore off, he wouldn't remember a thing between taking the coin and snapping out of the trance later. All right, traffic's starting to thin out, I said as we neared the warehouse district. You think you can give him a little more room?
Sure thing, pal.
Although I couldn't help but like this guy's hospitable disposition, the spell was unsettling nonetheless. It was a temporary, altered state of being, and it was that altered part that was making me more and more uncomfortable. In my world, there was a basic law of magic. The longer an exposure to a spell, the more unknown a spell's counter-effect would be. Magic of any kind tends to completely skew nature, so that an individual's reactions become harder and more unpredictable than a cranky swamp serpent. This was the caution we were always given when the mages would impart their gifts to us in the form of a fool's gold coin, or even something like the Sword of Acryonis. In using magic, a chain of events is set into motion, and if you're not careful, you could quickly lose control of those events. And then, you're truly screwed. The cabbie started whistling cheerfully as we crossed over another pair of railroad tracks. Behind us, the skyscrapers of Chicago several city blocks away. The buildings around us now were short, squat buildings, large only in their width as opposed to their height. Far ahead of us, the bakery truck began to slow. Give him more room, cabbie, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. In fact, go on and stop here. We pulled over to the curb and watched our bakery truck pass 2 more warehouses before stopping. Even though it was 2 in the afternoon, the truck suddenly turned on its headlamps, then off they went. And on again. 1 row up, a large warehouse opened its doors. The truck revved its engine and then disappeared into the gaping maw that slowly shut once the truck was safely inside. All right, cabbie, that's it, I said, opening the door and stepping out. You can go home.
Need any help with your bag, sir?
I took a deep breath of the dockside air and felt my stomach roil. The smell of the docks always made me queasy. Now, just give me a moment to get it out of the car, and then you can get out of here before things get ugly. I needed to chew on a bit of rubena root, provided I still had some in my backpack. Best thing for a stomach that wasn't settling right. This will only take a sec. The cabbie began whistling once more. That hadn't bothered me when he was driving, but now with his window rolled down, I wasn't certain how well sound carried around here. Hey, I said around the open trunk. You mind keeping the musical mouth concert to yourself? The cabbie glanced back at me apologetically.
Oh, sorry, sir.
From the open boot came my trusted backpack of worn leather and suede. It didn't really go with the brown pinstripe I was wearing, but the backpack was not for making a fashion statement. The soft clinking of metal against metal from the weapons once hanging in the office reassured me that I was as prepared as I was going to be for whatever I might find here. I reached into one of the outside pockets of the haversack and found a collection of small, thin roots, no longer than an elf's index finger. I began to chew on the end of the Rabenna root and smiled at the sugar sweetness in it. In a few minutes, those butterflies in my stomach would settle. I closed the trunk with a quiet thud. One last thing for me to do. Okay, here's what you're going to do, I said to the cabbie. Turn the car around and drive out to your favorite restaurant. Buy yourself a nice meal. Just relax. And when this spell wears off, I don't want you to worry about a thing. You've had a long day and lost track of time, okay?
Yeah, you're probably right.
He suddenly gave a healthy yawn.
I've been working pretty hard lately.
So go on. Treat yourself to a nice meal.
Thanks, pal. Can I do anything else for you?
Yeah, I nodded, holding out my bare hand. As the magic was in tune only with him, it couldn't do me any harm. Give me that gold coin back.
Oh, sure.
He reached into his pocket and dug out the fool's gold coin. It covered my palm, and I was impressed at how quickly it had changed. The coin was lighter, and its original brilliant sheen now appeared dull in the intermittent sunlight.
Did we settle on fare, sir?
The driver asked. I had promised him a Hamilton, but he was already several Lincolns in the black after picking me up this morning, waiting all afternoon, and then getting me out here. Did he really earn Alec's attention? I've been hoping to keep that charm for later tonight. Looking at the tarnished piece of metal covering my small palm, I breathed heavily. Yeah, I said. We're square.
Good night, sir.
He replied happily. I watched the cab disappear back into the thicket of brownstones and skyscrapers, and then I cast a glance 10 warehouses down to where the truck now kept safe harbor. It was still too early to poke my head into Capone's storage unit and take a look around. I had to wait until tonight. While it takes a serious pair of stones to bootleg in broad daylight, it wouldn't be the same for the singing sword. Tonight was going to be when everything went down. Shoving the spent magic item into my pocket, I darted for the warehouse next to the one with the white truck. Thanks to the enchanted lockpicks, I was on the other side of the door in 2 waves of a magic wand. This warehouse was nothing out of the ordinary. The smell of sawdust hung in the still air. It would have been nice if all the wood stored in this unit brought back the sights and sounds of sleeping in the unmarred groves of my own realm. But instead, there was a sharp, sterile scent of cut wood. I chewed a bit more on the stick in my mouth, suckling a bit more of its sap. I settled against the door I came in, glanced at my wristwatch, and waited.